Hi guys, today we'll be running through two simple techniques that you can apply immediately to your playing to sound more jazzy and sophisticated instantly, whether you're improvising or playing a song by ear. Before we begin, I just want to reiterate that improvising and playing by ear are very closely related in the sense that many of the skills learned from improvising can be applied to playing by ear and vice versa. Try to think of both improvising and playing by ear as two skills that complement each other very well, rather than two separate skills that should be learned independently from one another. Without further ado, let's dive right into our two techniques. This entire video will be in the key of C major for simplicity's sake. The first technique to sound more jazzy instantly is by adding chord extensions and by using extended chords. Here's me playing over a progression without using any extended chords. And here's the version where I use extended chords. Simply put, our normal chords contain 3 notes, and extended chords are just normal chords, but with more notes added behind. In the key of C major, we have 7 chords that we can make using the notes of the C major scale, also known as diatonic chords. These 7 chords are C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. Out of these 7 chords, C major, F major, G major, and A minor are used the most, followed by D minor and E minor, and finally, B diminished, which is rarely used in comparison to the rest, so we won't touch this much. To make our playing sound more jazzy, we can simply extend each of our diatonic chords. For each chord, we take a look at the last note of the chord and move up by 2 notes in our key. We then add this extra note to our original chord, and there we have an extended chord. For instance, here is a C major chord whose last note is a G. We move up by 2 notes in our C major key and we end up with a B. We then add this B note to our original C major chord, and now we have an extended chord which consists of C, E, G, and B. This extended chord is also known as the C major 7 chord. Using another example, here is the A minor chord, whose last note is an E. We move up by 2 notes from E and we land on a G. We add G to our original A minor chord and we get an extended chord which consists of A, C, E, and G, which is also known as the A minor 7 chord. To clarify, the 7th note in this chord names refer to the 7th note of the chord rather than our key, which is C major. For instance, if I'm looking at the A minor 7 chord, the 7th note here refers to the 7th note of the A minor scale, as we are looking at the A minor chord. It does not refer to the 7th note of the C major scale, which is our key. With that misconception out of the way, we repeat this process for all 6 chords, and we get the C major 7 chord, the D minor 7 chord, the E minor 7 chord, the F major 7 chord, the G dominant 7 chord, also known as the G7 chord, and lastly, the A minor 7 chord. Also, this method works in any key, be it G major or A major or whichever key you wish to use. The 1st and 4th chords will always be major 7 chords, the 2nd, 3rd, and 6th chords will always be minor 7 chords, and the 5th chord will always be a dominant 7 chord. As such, don't worry about this technique not being applicable to other keys, as it works in other keys as well. For those who are newer to this, I recommend starting out in a C major key, so you don't need to deal with annoying black keys, and then moving on to other keys once you have built more confidence in this. To bring chord extensions a little further, we can add 9th notes on top of our 7 notes. Here's an example where 9th notes are not added to the extended chords. And here's one where the 9th notes are added to our extended chords. Notice the slightly jazzier feel that the 9th notes bring to the table. 9th notes are essentially second notes. As the scale has 7 notes, the 8th note is essentially your first note, but 1 octave higher. And so, the 9th note is essentially the second note, but also 1 octave higher. If you see or hear about 9th notes online in other tutorials, books, or whatnot, just know that 9th notes are simply a fancy way to say second notes. With that confusion out of the way, let's put this into practice. Here's the C major 7 chord, which contains 4 notes, C, E, G, and B. Here, C is the first note, E is the 3rd note, G is the 5th note, and B is the 7th note. To add a 9th note to our extended chord, we take the 7th note and move up 2 notes. After we move up 2 notes from our 7th chord B, we get the 9th note D. One shortcut to getting the 9th note would be to keep in mind that the 9th note is essentially the second note. And using the C major 7 chord as an example, we get the second note D rather quickly. Now that we have a 9th note D, we add it to our C major 7 chord, and now we have a bigger extended chord with 5 notes, C, E, G, B, and D. This chord is also known as a C major 9 chord. Let's apply this to the other chords. Using the same logic for the other extended chords, we get the C major 9 chord, the D minor 9 chord, the F major 9 chord, the G 9 chord. Notice that I've left out the equivalent for the E minor chord, as the 9th chord does not work well in this context. As such, once we are kind of comfortable with using the 7 extended chords, we can up our game a little by replacing them with the 9th extended chords. Once again, I recommend that you start with the C major key if you're not that familiar with all this, and systematically move on to other keys once you're more comfortable with all these chords. One very important thing I want to add is, do not be afraid of using inversions when you're playing these extended chords. In essence, an inversion of a chord contains the exact same notes but in a different order. For instance, here is the C major chord. Here is one inversion of the C major chord, and here is another. Notice that in these inversions, the notes are exactly the same as the C major chord, but they are in a different order. This is essentially what inversions are. Applying this to our extended 7th and 9th chords, the idea is the same, but there's just more notes to work with. For instance, here is a C major 7 chord. Here is one inversion of it, and here is another, and another. Notice that the notes are all the exact same, but because we have more notes to work with, there becomes more ways that we can arrange them. Similarly, here are some possible inversions for the C major 9 chord. As it has even more notes, the possible number of inversions are more than the previous two. That being said, after you become kind of comfortable with the different extended chords, I highly encourage you to incorporate these inversions into your playing, as they do add new interesting jazzy sounds and feels in ways that normal chords might not be able to. The second technique to sound more jazzy instantly is through chord substitutions, and this synergizes really well with our first technique of using extended chords. Essentially, a chord substitution is when you replace an existing chord in your progression with another chord with the intention of creating some sort of more unique and interesting sound. Here's an example where I don't use any kind of chord substitution. And here is one where I use some chord substitution. Notice that the chord substitutions add certain interesting sounds to our playing. As for the exact steps to use chord substitutions, there are no exact steps. Some chords work and some chords not really. And one way to learn which chords work and which chords don't would be to actually experiment and test it by yourself. Another faster and more efficient way would be for me to tell you some chord substitutions that work pretty well and for you to add it to your playing immediately. Without further ado, here are 5 simple chord substitutions that you can add to Jazzify your playing instantly. Firstly, we have the E minor 7 flat 5th chord, which can be used to replace the E minor chord or the E minor 7 chord. Here's how the E minor 7 flat 5th chord sounds in practice. Notice that this substitution adds some tension to your chord, hence giving it a jazzier feel. The E minor 7 flat 5th chord is essentially equal to the E minor 7 chord, except for one note. The 5th note of the E minor 7 chord is a B, and we need to flat this and turn it into a B flat. With that, we have the E minor 7 flat 5th chord. Our second substitution synergizes pretty well with our first chord. It is none other than the A dominant 7 chord, which is also known as the A7 chord, and it can be used to replace the A minor chord or its extensions. Here's how it sounds in practice. To get the A7 chord, we start with an A minor 7 chord. We then take its third note, which is C, and add a sharp to it, turning it into a C sharp, and there we have the A dominant 7 chord. Our next 3 chord substitutions can all be used to replace the G major chord or its extensions. Our third substitution is the F minor over G chord, and can be used in place of the G major chord for a more jazzy feel. Here's how it sounds in practice. The chord F minor over G essentially means that we play an F minor chord but with a G bass note. Thus, in our right hand, we play an F minor chord here, while in our left hand, we play the G note as its bass. To get an F minor chord, we start with an F major chord and we flat the third note A. We will thus be left with F, A flat, and C, which makes up the F minor chord, but don't forget your G bass note too. Our fourth substitution is the G augmented over G7 chord, which can also be used to replace the G major chord or its extensions. Here's how it sounds in practice. Here, the chord name just means that we play the G augmented chord with our right hand and the normal G7 chord with our left hand. To get the G augmented chord, we start with the normal G major chord. We then take the 5th note, D, and sharp it, and we end up with the G augmented chord containing G, B, and D sharp. When we play this in our right hand and the G7 chord in our left hand, we thus get the G augmented over G7 chord. I highly recommend using inversions for this specific chord, as its inversions sound amazingly jazzy. Our 5th and last chord substitution is the D flat minor 7 over G chord, which can replace the G major chord or its extensions. Here's how it sounds in practice. As its name suggests, once again, we play the D flat minor 7 chord in our right hand and a G bass note in our left hand. I especially enjoy using this chord substitution due to how much jazzier it can make your playing, and also due to how much changing just this one chord can change the entire feel of the song. Of course, there are many more possible tried and tested chord substitutions that you can add to your playing, but I'll cover them in batches in future videos. Do give these 5 new chords a try first, and do leave a comment down below telling me if these chord substitutions have made your playing more jazzy. With that, thanks for watching, and I hope this video has provided value to you in some way. If it has, do consider giving this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already, if you don't wish to miss more of these videos. And also because it will really help out this channel in the long run. I'll see you in the next video.